Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famina Miller. It's 8 p.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya, 1 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 1 a.m. in Beijing. Also coming up in the next hour. A second bank in Zimbabwe has failed to pay depositors as a liquidity crunch hits the country's banking sector. And changing coaches, Egypt confirmed they'll not renew Bob Bradley's contract after the American failed to lead the team to Brazil 2014. We begin with reports that the commander of the ruthless Ugandan rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony, is on the verge of surrender. The Ugandan army, which has been in pursuit of the fugitive commander, is skeptical about the reports and urges caution. The government of the Central African Republic says it's in talks with the Ugandan warlord, hoping he'd surrender. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has more.
Claims that Joseph Kony is in talks about his surrender are being greeted cautiously in Uganda. Here there are serious doubts about his sincerity.
Those who are engaging with Joseph Kony should think about very seriously. Why does he have to ask for food immediately among all the demands? We need to be very careful that we are not being duped. They could ask for this food, take it away, only to disappear in the bush.
Authorities in the Central African Republic say they are engaged in discussions with Kony. But experts on the LRA warn this could be a trap.
The LRA is very known to play around with the international community and come out at times when there's pressure to say, okay, now we want peace talks, we want to engage in talks. And then they use that break in the military operations to regroup and find new areas to hide. So I think we have to be very careful.
Kony and two of his commanders have been indicted by the International Criminal Court. The US and the United Nations have put a $5 million bounty on the warlord's head. And there are therefore calls for more evidence that Joseph Kony is indeed in negotiations about a surrender.
I think the time is for senior diplomats to work directly with the government in the Central African Republic to find out, to verify these claims, is it true or is it not true, that there is some kind of communication. But then at the same time, keep the military pressure on the other groups where we know that there are other commanders hiding. So a combined strategy of diplomacy and military pressure.
AU forces recently resumed the hunt for the LRA after its suspension over claims that the government in the Central African Republic was not cooperating. It's thought Kony moved into Central African Republic from Kafia-Kingi, a disputed border area in Sudan.
To buy food, it's $20,000.
Uganda is urging the warlord and his fighters to surrender, saying it will hold discussions with the ICC on how best to handle him. Despite indictments by the ICC, the LRA leadership has so far avoided prosecution. But analysts say the massive military pressure from the AU forces and the harsh conditions in the jungles of the Central African Republic could have severely weakened the force. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Jinja, Eastern Uganda.
Meanwhile, United Nations leaders insist the head of the notorious Lord's Resistance Army is on the run and feeling the pinch of an African Union offensive. The latest report to the Security Council, the head of the UN's Central Africa Regional Office warns that Joseph Kony and his followers are still a threat as they roam vast regions of Central Africa. Our UN correspondent Stephen Fee has the story.
In the virtually impenetrable wilderness of Central African Republic, members of a 3,000-strong African Union force search for the remaining members of the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA. The United Nations says the LRA is responsible for over 100,000 deaths since its founding in the 1980s. But UN officials say the regional offensive is gaining ground.
Military operations have degraded the LRA and limited it to pursuing survival tactics. However, recent attacks in South Sudan attributed to the LRA are a reminder that the group remains a serious and unpredictable threat.
A 2012 viral video campaign made the group's rebel leader Joseph Kony notorious. He originally founded the group as a rebellion against Uganda's government. He now stands accused of mass murder, rape, and the abduction of thousands of children to be used as sex slaves and soldiers.
Surely Joseph Kony is on the run. We give him no reprieve. He's been moving effectively, as Ambassador Abu Musa said, between the borders of Darfur, or Darfur itself, and Central African Republic.
In the Central African Republic, or CAR, the rebel government that seized power earlier this year temporarily banned foreign troops. Though AU soldiers have been readmitted, regional instability has diplomats worried.
We must now ensure that the LRA does not benefit from a security vacuum in the CAR to prosper.
Each of the countries actually in which they operate face other, even more immediate threats to the authority of those states to even exist.
Michael Poffenberger founded the Resolve LRA Crisis Initiative. Its online tracking tool monitors LRA activity across the region.
Progress has been excruciatingly slow, but continues to move forward. LRA attacks on civilians are down, and there's an indication that Kony, the LRA leader, has actually shifted strategy to no longer commit the large-scale massacres and abductions that are historically what the LRA is known for.
Security Council members agree Joseph Kony is on the run, but when asked where Kony is, AU and UN officials say they just don't know. Stephen Fee, CCTV, New York.
Kenya is seeking to halt the International Criminal Court cases against President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto, pressing members of the Hague-based court on Thursday to amend the rules so heads of state don't have to attend trials. The campaign's become a rallying point in Africa, where many leaders say they're targeted unfairly by the ICC. Both Kenyatta and Ruto are accused of instigating violence after a 2007 election in which more than 1,000 people died, charges they deny. Ruto's trial began last month, while Kenyatta's is due to start on February 5th after being delayed for a third time. Last week, the African Union lost its bid to have the UN Security Council defer the cases for a year so the leaders could deal with the aftermath of the Westgate terror attack. Human rights groups are critical of the proposed changes and a British proposal to allow the accused to participate via video link, which they say would weaken the court's mission to bring those responsible for war crimes to justice. Well, let's go to our correspondent Jack Barton. He's in Brussels now for the latest on that story. Jack, can you tell us more about what's come out of that assembly gathering so far?
Well, that's right. What's been called at the ICC the Kenya agenda certainly has been at the forefront of discussion and debate today. Those relate, of course, to the African Union ratifications that are on the table that it most immediately would affect the trials, the ongoing current trial of Vice President Ruto, but also the upcoming trial of President Kenyatta. Now, yesterday we heard the President of the Assembly say that the decision not to allow immunity from trial for standing leaders is expected to stand. Even though there is going to be debate, there was debate today, there's going to be ongoing debate for the rest of the meeting, it is unlikely that that will change. Where change could come, and there are many indications from representatives at the meeting that their change will come here, is in what you were talking about before, the possibility of video conferencing of standing heads or deputy leaders not actually having to attend in person at the trial, but somehow being tried without being there themselves. We've seen Mr. Ruto given a number of exemptions, and they've been holding this up today as an example of how the court is flexible, but they're seeking really hard and fast rules as to how this can work, and that requires ratifications. On top of that, there's also been a lot of discussion on ratifying the Rome Treaty just to speed these trials up, not just of African officials, but all of the trials, because there is an agreement among everyone that these trials are going on too long. Some of the accused have died before their trials have even reached a conclusion. Everybody wants to change that. So the meeting is still ongoing. We don't know what changes are coming, but there is certainly an atmosphere at this meeting that change is needed and that changes will be made.
All right, Jack, so it's unlikely that Kenya would have a victory in terms of immunity for standing heads of government. However, how likely is it that they'd see a favorable outcome in any other respect?
Well, what we could see here is a ratification that would allow trial in absentia. So potentially by what the African Union is proposing, President Kenyatta might face trial but not actually have to attend the court himself. The big problem, though, is even if there are ratifications, and it does seem likely that there will be ratifications in the favour of Kenya's leadership, under the Rome Statute, under the court's rules, there still needs to be a period, a 1-year period of grace from the ratification to implementation. Of course, Mr. Ruto's trial is already underway. Even though President Kenyatta's trial has been delayed for a few months, it's still fast approaching. So really, for them to be affected, or for them to be, in their point of view, a positive change, there would need to actually be a ratification of that 1-year grace period between the ratification and the implementation. So far, we have heard no debate on that.
All right, Jack, thanks very much for that update on that ICC Assembly gathering. We're speaking there to Jack Barton, live in Brussels. It's time now for a break. When we come back, Somalia mulls ways to tame al-Shabaab militants. And details emerge as investigations into the mall collapse in South Africa open.
Uprooted from their homeland by 2 decades of bloody conflict, Kenya became the second home for hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees. Now it's time to start the journey back home.
It's the beginning of a journey of hope.
For many, it's a moment of both excitement and anxiety.
The large number of undocumented refugees has created unprecedented security challenges for our country.
We'll tell you why this week in Talk Africa.
Welcome back. Now, French special forces have killed the second-in-command of feared Islamist commander Mukhtar Belmokhtar in northern Mali. Hassan Al-Khalil, a Mauritanian known by his nickname Julebeb, was the deputy commander of Belmokhtar's Those Who Sign in Blood Brigade. The groups claimed attacks on the In Amenas gas plant in Algeria in January, in which 38 hostages died, and the twin suicide bombing of an Arriva uranium mine and a military barracks in Niger in May. Khalil's death comes as Islamist groups in northern Mali have stepped up their operations in recent months, with attacks on UN peacekeepers and the killing of 2 French journalists in the northern town of Kidal in November. The attacks have raised concerns over security in the north ahead of Sunday's legislative elections. On Thursday, at least 3 rockets reportedly launched by Islamist militants rocked the northern town of Gao. No one was reported killed. The United Nations-backed African Union force in Somalia has been bolstered by a further 4,000 troops and will soon launch a military offensive against Islamist militant al-Shabaab. But the terrorist group seems undeterred by UN and AU efforts, raising the question of whether a purely military solution is enough to win the fight against al-Shabaab. CCTV's Mohammed Emoge has this report.
Suicide attacks on the central police station of Beledweyne town, central Somalia, killed more than 20 people on Tuesday. Somalia's rebel guerrilla fighters Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack in the central town, about 185 miles north of the capital, Mogadishu. The Somali government condemned the attack and vows not to relent on its efforts to fight the group.
These kinds of attacks are meant to silence the people of Somalia. But as government, we are committed to rebuilding this country. We will continue the war against Al-Shabaab until we have a peaceful Somalia.
Al-Shabaab attacks have escalated in recent months. A similar attack in the same town last month killed 16 people. But how could this be avoided? Some people believe the remedy is not only military action.
What is more important is sensitization. The government should come out loud against the Al-Shabaab ideology, propagate messages of nationalism.
The Somali government has in the past said they will negotiate with those in Al-Shabaab ready to denounce violence.
We know the government has hinted of talks, but we have to understand the Al-Shabaab ideology is not based on talks, Before Ahmed Godane, the Al-Shabaab leader, accept talks, the question is he even aware of nationalism and the state of Somalia before talks begins? The condition is acknowledging statehood and governance. They don't believe that.
4 months ago, a top Al-Shabaab commander surrendered. Sheikh Hassan Dahir Weiss has since remained in custody. The United Nations Security Council approved a further 4,000 troops for the African Union mission in Somalia, bringing the force numbers to more than 22,000. Although that is such a formidable force in the front line, Al-Shabaab, on the other hand, have changed tact and is now largely a guerrilla force, hitting both in landmine and suicide attacks. Mohamed Rumoge, CCTV, Mogadishu.
The owner of an unfinished mall in South Africa that collapsed this week has reportedly said he did have permission to construct. The building site's second floor crashed to the ground, killing 1 person and injuring 26. Police have opened a culpable homicide investigation. CCTV's Guy Henderson's following developments in Tongaat near the city of Durban.
With the search for survivors over, the focus is now turning to municipal authorities here at City Hall in Durban. A court document has emerged, it's being reported by local media here, in which the director of the main contractor involved in this work at this Tongaat Mall site claims both that he had already a verbal agreement for this work to go ahead. He says in this document that it's not uncommon for companies to continue and to begin work despite not yet having permission. He said that the process of gaining fast-track permission for that work was already underway, and he also stressed that in his view nobody involved in the project was at risk. Now that has opposition parties claiming both that this points towards corruption potentially and possible weaknesses within municipal processes. The owner of the company, Rectangular Investment Holdings, a man called Mr. Jay Singh, is believed to have been the recipient on previous occasions of various relatively large government tenders and contracts. There are now details emerging in the local press about what appears to be a reasonably blemished record even before this incident took place. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Durban, South Africa.
Africa Live returns after this break with more, including: we shall not relent. Egypt military chief makes a pledge as soldiers killed in Sinai attack are buried. And aid workers in Africa get tips on how to remain safe and efficient during rescue missions.
International news with the global perspective. World Insight is the only program with analysis from around the world, with lively discussions and feature reports. Tuning each week for World Insight, only on CCTV News.
Welcome back. Government officials in Egypt have announced 3 days of national mourning after the suicide attack in northern Sinai, in which at least 11 soldiers were killed. Officials say investigations are underway to identify the perpetrators of the attack. CCTV's Yasser Hakim has the latest.
A 3-day mourning period for a week that has witnessed the assassination of a senior police commander, a train crash that killed more than 20, and a suicide attack on a military bus in northern Sinai, leaving 11 soldiers dead. The last attack brought strong reaction from the state.
They want to destroy Egypt, but the departed dead are our martyrs. They will only make us stronger and more determined to end terrorism like we did before. We are here to stop the killers from terrorizing the people, even if it means dying for this cause.
The military announced it had arrested 7 suspects in connection to the attack. It showed a video depicting how the suicide operation took place. They showed a car laden with 150 kilograms of explosives rammed into the bus carrying the soldiers who were on their way to the capital, Cairo.
There are several groups like Ansar el-Madeh operating here after Morsi allowed them in the country when he was president. They are well armed and funded, but suicide attacks are signs terrorists are losing the battle against the army, so they are resorting to this. Their aim is to hit at the morale of the soldiers.
Analysts say it might take some while before terrorism is completely wiped out of the country, and as a result, more losses are expected soon. However, Egypt has the experience in dealing with these kinds of problems, having faced a similar situation in the 1990s, where it managed to successfully eradicate militants then. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
A gas explosion has killed as many as 25 people and injured dozens others in a gold mine in eastern Guinea. Local police say the accident took place on Wednesday at an artisanal mine in the remote Sigiri province northeast of the capital Conakry. The zone holds some of the West African country's largest gold reserves. Cases of infections and deaths from cholera outbreak in Nigeria on the rise and are rapidly spreading into 12 states of the country. The latest outbreak of the disease was first recorded in mid-October. So far, the death toll is up to 100.
This week, a cholera outbreak in Nigeria's central North Benue state has claimed 30 more lives. The epidemic is reported to have caused more than 100 deaths in the country. The latest infection struck Zamfara state, where residents began drinking water directly from the streams and untreated wells, after a main water pipeline was forced to shut down. The disease has now spread into southern states within a few weeks as a result of poor hygiene.
Take, for instance, the culture of dumping of refuse in drains, for instance. For a lot of the people, they don't appreciate that the tonnage of refuse that goes into the drains, even in some of the streams or tributaries of rivers around Lagos, is a major health hazard.
As the nation's population and poor sanitation continues to grow, Nigeria remains vulnerable to further cholera outbreaks. Following the outbreak, the health minister has asked all federal health facilities in the country to provide free services to cholera patients.
Cholera is a communicable disease that, simply put, if there are poor sanitary methods, now in this part of our world, the developing world, there are still issues with environmental sanitation in terms of people's idea of maintaining basic sanitation practices. The kind of climate that we have, a tropical climate, where when you have rainy seasons, which we've been experiencing of late, it will also enhance the spread of cholera.
Cholera is seen as an acute disease. Acute in the sense that it spans between 1 to 6 hours. Someone may have a cholera by morning, by nightfall, is already dead. And one of those things that leads to death is due to the severe water derangement, because individuals who end up coming up with cholera start vomiting and stooling. And when you vomit and stool, you lose a lot of body fluid and also body electrolytes. And you can easily have a derangement of the body electrolyte, and this can rapidly lead to death.
In recent years, cholera incidents in Nigeria and the entire West African states have been on the decline. But the poor sanitation, climate change, and an increase in rainfall, the disease has been making a comeback. Robert Soy, CCTV.
Now, it's commonly known that road accidents are a major cause of death around the world. In Africa, aid workers at the front line of providing humanitarian assistance are often hampered by dangers en route to disaster or conflict zones. A special workshop organized alongside a humanitarian exhibition in Brussels seeks to train NGOs in Africa about tightening management of their fleets. Our correspondent Sandra Gathman has more from the forum.
At this year's AIDEX Convention on Humanitarian Aid and Disaster Response, the floor space was dominated by all sorts of vehicles designed to navigate potentially hazardous environments to deliver aid and assistance and keep workers safe.
But according to global research, statistics show that between 85 to 90% of road crashes and accidents are not down to the vehicles themselves or even external factors. It's mostly down to human error.
Which is why a specially organized forum for NGOs all over Africa is training fleet managers to realize that lack of strict rules is not only putting drivers and workers at risk, but hampering aid missions. This seminar serves to count the number of risks fleet managers face every day when deploying their vehicles, from driver fatigue to passengers not wearing seatbelts. The crucial message is that most dangers can be avoided.
30 is under your control, okay? Other, is it higher? 70? 80? I would like to go for 80%. 80% is under the control of the organization.
So, with 80% of responsibility resting on companies' shoulders, aid organizations are being encouraged to implement more robust fleet management strategies.
If you look at it, a lot of organizations are putting measures in place that their staff are not going to be blown up by terrorists or that they are safe whenever they do their job. But a lot of these aid and development workers are spending hours and hours in vehicles. And they are in environments where there might be a mismatch between education, between enforcement of traffic rules, engineering of roads and vehicles. So they are putting their staff at risk.
Not only is safety a concern, but road accidents are costing low-income countries up to $100 billion, much more than the total annual amount received in development aid.
Fleet is one of the single largest expense to humanitarian organizations after staffing cost. So in this forum, we are trying to see how we are generally managing our fleet out there in terms of looking at cost efficiency.
It's something commercial suppliers are realizing too. Companies like Toyota, whose Land Cruisers are used regularly in aid missions all over the world, are stepping up their support.
Organisations would have looked at us as a vehicle supplier, but they're actually looking for more than that now. So they're saying, okay, our vehicles are out in the field, we're operating them, but there's all sorts of issues of maintenance and vehicle life, etc. So these organisations are getting more sophisticated. They expect more from us as a supplier. So that's why we're getting into this area of fleet management.
The general road habits and traffic policies of countries will be tough to change overnight, but it's hoped that tougher management of humanitarian fleets will put the brakes on unnecessary dangers that are placing those helping others at risk too. Sandra Gottman, CCTV, Brussels.